Hi, everybody, and welcome to Lovefraud Live. When we first meet sociopaths, they typically seem to be charming, friendly, and exciting. Later, after we've been exploited, we realize that it was all an act, and we were targeted by a professional. Once we get over the shock, we wonder, how did they get that way? I'm Donna Andersen, author of Lovefraud.com, and tonight I'll explain how sociopaths become expert exploiters. At the end of my presentation, I'll answer your questions. To join the chat or ask a question, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. So, how do sociopaths always seem to know exactly what to say and what buttons to push? Lots of people are mystified by this. Lovefraud heard from a reader who asked, how do sociopaths know what to do or how to act or what tactics to use to get what they want? The reader pointed out that sociopaths use tactics such as intermittent reinforcement, but most do not have degrees in psychology. So he asked, how do they know to use those tactics to begin with? It's as if sociopaths are reading from the same manual. My reader wondered, is it subconscious, intuitive behavior? Well, in my view, the answer is a three-step process. First, sociopaths have an inborn desire for dominance. Second, they practice throughout their lives. And third, they eventually become so good that their strategies are second nature. We'll take a closer look at the three steps, but first, a bit of terminology. What is a sociopath? The term sociopath originally meant anything deviated or pathological in social relations. Today, the word is no longer an official clinical diagnosis, although many professionals use sociopath as shorthand for antisocial personality disorder. Lovefraud uses the word sociopath as it was originally intended, as an umbrella term for what the American Psychiatric Association now calls cluster B personality disorders. These include antisocial, narcissistic personality disorders, plus psychopathy. They all have a common dimension. People with these disorders take advantage of the rest of us. So, much of the explanation that I provide today is based on research about psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. The two disorders are highly genetic. This means that a child can be born with a genetic predisposition to the disorders. Whether they actually develop may depend upon the parenting that the child receives or the environment that he or she grows up in. Unfortunately, sociopaths make terrible parents. Therefore, it's very possible that a child will get both the genetic risk and bad parenting. This, unfortunately, is a recipe for creating another sociopath. So, what exactly is the genetic risk? Antisocials and psychopaths have an inborn desire for dominance. According to Dr. Leanne Leadham, psychopathic individuals are motivated to exert power and control in their relationships. Now, it's normal for all of us to have a power motivation to a certain degree. This is what makes us work hard, want to succeed, and become a leader. But most of us also have a love motivation. We want close relationships in our lives, and we want to take care of people. Our love motivation puts the brakes on our power motivation. In psychopaths and antisocials, however, Dr. Leadham explains, the power motivation is out of control, and they have little to no love motivation to slow it down. So the only thing that really gives sociopaths pleasure in their social relations is exerting power over others. This is the foundation of their inborn desire for exploiting people. Sociopaths experience power and control over others as rewarding, and because it is rewarding, they are motivated to learn how to do it, in some cases, starting at a young age. Some parents have told me that they saw their children lying and manipulating when they were 3 or 4 years old. These kids grew up to be disordered. Other sociopaths behave normally as young children and then change with puberty. Because the disorders are highly influenced by testosterone, most sociopaths start exhibiting their problem behavior by their early to middle teen years. So, what does this mean? Young sociopaths find it rewarding to exert power and control over others, their family members, friends, classmates, even authority figures like teachers and cops. For example, they lie to someone. The person believes the lie, and the young sociopath experiences the thrill of duping delight. So they start engaging in dominance behavior while young. Then, through trial and error, they learn what works and what doesn't work. They learn how to get a reaction out of someone, which gives them pleasure. They learn what lies people are likely to fall for, which also gives them pleasure. As life goes on, they keep practicing the skill of manipulating and exploiting others. Why? Because it's fun. Sociopaths can be regarded as lifelong students of manipulation and exploitation strategies. By the time they're adults, they've been doing it for so long and that they are so practiced that, yes, their behavior has become second nature. There are also sociopaths who actively work on these talents, we could call them. Several people have told me that the favorite book of the sociopath they knew was The Art of War, which was written by the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu. Another favorite book is The 48 Laws of Power. Some sociopaths actually do study psychology. I've heard about plenty of disordered therapists. Others may not explicitly study the field, but they are aware that they are different. One respondent in the Lovefraud Senior Sociopath Survey wrote that her sociopathic husband was acutely aware of his special gift. That was what he called it. It was his ability to manipulate people into doing what he wanted. Other respondents in my book who married the sociopaths while young wrote that their disordered partners became more skillful exploiters as they got older. On the other hand, some respondents also reported that over the age of 50, the sociopaths they knew stopped trying to hide their manipulations. They no longer cared about maintaining a facade of normalcy. So here's the bottom line. By the time we encounter sociopaths as adults, they've spent their entire lives developing what in business lingo would be called core competencies. And these core competencies are manipulation and exploitation. They're so good at it that their behavior appears to be subconscious and intuitive. But in reality, they've learned how to exert dominance over others. Why? Because they like it. Now, we aren't motivated by power and control and don't actively pursue dominating others, so their behavior mystifies us. We'll never truly understand them. All we can really do is recognize that exploitation and manipulation are central to the identity of sociopaths. And as I say in my Senior Sociopaths book, these traits will not change. If we suspect someone may be disordered, we should keep them out of our lives. Okay, so let's see if we have some questions here. Oh, we got a bunch of hellos. Okay, so Susie Bessie says, if their strategies are second nature, do they even realize what they are? Well, I assume that you're talking about, do the sociopaths realize that they're sociopaths? And some of them do, and some of them don't. There are plenty of sociopaths who know what they are. It may be because they've been dragged into therapy sessions by their parents who are trying to figure out what was going on. It may be because they've been evaluated for the military or some other organization. It could be that they were court-ordered into therapy after engaging in some kind of behavior that brought them to the attention of the authorities. Criminals also typically can get evaluated. So there may be plenty of cases where sociopaths have been professionally evaluated. And there's also cases where people just research themselves, just like anytime you and I have an ache or pain and we start looking on the internet to see what it might be. There are sociopaths who research to see what their behavior may mean. Many of them are proud of themselves. There's a website, which I don't want to say the name because I don't want to give them any publicity, but essentially it's by sociopaths for sociopaths, where they talk about what they do and how they exploit others, and they trade tips and things like that. So there are plenty of sociopaths who know exactly what they are, and in many cases, as I said earlier, they're proud of it. I've had several sociopaths who identified themselves, wrote to me, claimed that they were sociopaths, and then said that they were the next step in evolution. They were superior to the rest of us. And I've had sociopaths write to me saying that, if you people are dumb enough to fall for our scams, that's your problem, not ours. So there are plenty of sociopaths who do know that they're different, and many of them also know that they have a psychological diagnosis. Okay, so Kinda Thomas says, what happens when you realize what they are and stop complying with their demands? Well, that may depend on the nature of your relationship. If this is a family member or a romantic partner, they may lash out. Typically, many sociopaths, since they want power and control, they want dominance. A corollary of that is that they view people as objects and almost as possessions. So that, for example, if you are dating or married to a sociopath and you finally catch on to what's going on and decide that, you're not going to go along with this anymore, well, they can often ramp up the abuse, ramp up the exploitation, or they can turn on the charm again to try and draw you back in. I mean, the bottom line is that they don't want to lose control of their property, and you being their property. So they will figure out or attempt to try and draw you back in. And many times they're successful. That's what hoovering is. Hoover like the vacuum cleaner. You get rid of them and then they suck you back in. And, because they've been doing this all their lives, and because they've been analyzing you, they know what's going to work. So, and often they'll just try different strategies. I mean, sometimes, They may like yell and scream and threaten to commit suicide. And then they turn around and they start, telling you how wonderful you are and that they're going to go for therapy and you're the best thing that ever happened to them. So you're getting whiplash, because they're going back and forth. And what's happening is that they're just trying different strategies to see what will work. So it kind of depends on the type of relationship, and also if they perceive that you are still useful to them. I mean, this is the whole thing. Sociopaths take advantage of people who are useful, and if you're no longer useful, then they don't bother. They throw you away. But if they perceive that you are useful, then they may try to draw you back in. So all of the above are possibilities. So the key is for you to realize, once you realize that someone is a sociopath, that you need to make up your mind that you're getting out. Yeah, because nothing good will ever come of this. I mean, this is what you need to understand. This is the main point of my Senior Sociopaths book, is that they never get better. They never change. It will never be better for you, and there's a very good chance that it will be worse. So if that's the case, there's no point staying involved, and you need to extricate yourself. Okay. Corrine says, this is great and right on. I'm glad that you find it helpful. Okay, so Heather asks, is criminal behavior common for sociopaths? Yes. There are plenty of criminals who are sociopathic or psychopathic. And I think the figure is that about 25% of people who are locked up in prisons are psychopaths. But there are also plenty of sociopaths and psychopaths who engage in behavior that is immoral or unethical, but not necessarily illegal. There are sociopaths who certainly understand the repercussions of breaking the law and don't want to go there. They don't want to go to jail. They don't want to be arrested. They don't want to do all that stuff. So folks like this can go right up to the edge of the law and not cross it, or they can talk their way out of it. I mean, plenty of sociopaths do that. They get arrested and then they start talking and pretty soon, people are like, whatever, and let them go. They talk themselves out of trouble. In fact, a lot of sociopaths count on being able to talk themselves out of trouble. And, when somebody finally doesn't buy it, they're kind of shocked that happens. So the answer is yes. Many sociopaths can be criminal, can engage in criminal behavior. Many criminals are sociopaths, but it's not required. There are plenty of sociopaths who never get arrested for anything. Okay, so how likely is it that their children will grow up to be a sociopath? Again, the key here is whether or not the child inherits the genetic predisposition. And genetics is a crapshoot. I mean, I've spoken to plenty of people who were normal and empathic who realized that both of their parents were disordered. They had a sociopathic father and a borderline mother, or two sociopaths or something like that, a narcissist and an antisocial. And they did not get the genes. So they just endured what went on in their childhood, and in many cases were damaged by it, but they were not disordered. However, they could have a sibling who inherited the genes, or other people in the family. So the key to whether or not someone actually becomes disordered, antisocial or psychopathic or narcissistic, is probably the genetics. And then if they do inherit the genetics and they get the bad parenting, they can definitely grow up to be a sociopath. Now, on the other hand, there are people who have realized that they've had a child with a sociopath, and they're going, "Oh my God, is my baby going to grow up to be a sociopath?" So there are steps that can be taken to essentially teach the child how to love, because that's may or may not be there. And you want to start, like, if you realize you've had a child with a sociopath, you want to, from the very beginning, at least assume that there's a possibility that they may have inherited the genes, and do what you can to mitigate it, which may be possible if you can teach the child how to love, that and kind of change their perceptions and get them to value relationships, which is not what happens if they are disordered. Disordered people do not value human relationships, but you can teach children how to like it. You can teach them moral reasoning. So there's a possibility that if you start young enough, that you can direct them against any genetic predisposition. It may not be easy. In some cases, it's not possible, but you certainly want to try if you realize that your kid may be at risk. And if they're not at risk, if they grow up and you realize that they haven't inherited any predisposition, that's terrific, great. In the meantime, you will have taught them how to be loving and responsible, and that's a good thing anyway. Anne Marie says, "When will we know we are over the sociopath?" Well, you'll feel better when it doesn't matter to you anymore. Typically the experience of being involved with a sociopath is pretty shattering. That certainly was my experience. I was curled up on the floor, crying for months. But once you can get the pain out of your system, and the way you do that is by crying and by allowing yourself to process the actual emotions of your experience. Once you get it out of your system, and work on your recovery from whatever may have made you vulnerable to the sociopath to begin with. I encourage folks who have been in these situations to actively work on your recovery, because the more you work on it, the faster you'll get through it. The old saying is, time heals all ills. Well, not necessarily. Sometimes it just creates a scab over things and keeps it all buried inside, in which case it attracts another sociopath. So the idea is to work on your recovery to get it out of your system. And typically we're not the same person after the experience as we were before it, but it doesn't have to be terrible, because in my case, I became less judgmental. I think it helped me to acquire some wisdom. It opened my eyes to what really goes on in the world, and what goes on is that millions of people like this are around us, and we need to be aware of it. So there are definitely lessons to be learned from the experience, and it's once you stop feeling badly, when you stop beating yourself up over what has happened, when you can look forward to life, when you can, have your friends and do things and not be thinking about it all the time, that's when you're over it. And it's possible. It is certainly possible. Well, so AM says, "The ex-mob maintenance guy with keys to my apartment who has hit on me for the past 2.5 years was silent when I showed him Thomas Sheridan's playlist about psychopaths." Well, I wouldn't necessarily expect someone to own up to it, or to say, "Oh, gee, that sounds like me. I think I better change." That probably isn't going to happen, but hopefully he realized that you were onto him, and sometimes that's enough to get them to just go away and find an easier target. So I hope that's what happened. Perfume Asupier asks, do sociopaths exploit their children as well? Can they genuinely care for their children, or are they just another possession? Yes, they can certainly exploit their children. No, they cannot genuinely care for their children because they cannot care for anybody. And yeah, they're just another possession. In fact, I actually talk about this in my Senior Sociopaths book. I have a whole chapter on sociopaths, senior sociopaths as parents, which was based on the information from my survey respondents, and they talk about that. They talk about what they experienced both as children and how these disordered parents continue to exploit them as they got older. So if you're looking for information on that, you might want to pick up the book because it is in there. All right, so Anne-Marie says the mental abuse was horrific. My husband is 56 and has gotten worse as the older he gets. Heard that. Plenty of people have said that, that's for sure. AM also asks how to extricate when they hack all the devices. Well, you have to be smart. I mean, get new devices. You just really have to think carefully about how to get out and what you need to do. It can be done, but it can be draining, that's for sure. But you have to be smart. I mean, you know this person if you've been with them for 20 years. So, figure out a way to work around what you know that they will do. Okay, so Connie asks, what is the disorder of the willing victim of a sociopath who seeks out being dominated, controlled, and or abused? I'm not sure that, I've never heard of a disorder with that description that people, let me take that back. At one time, there were disorders, and I think, what was it called? There was a disorder where people were being, especially women, were being blamed for willingly getting into these situations. That disorder has been discarded. It was eliminated from the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. It could be a trauma reaction. People talk about codependency. I'm not sure codependency is really accurate in talking about how people get into these situations. In fact, my colleague Dr. Leadham and I did a scientific paper where we drew the comparison between codependency and trauma behavior. And it turns out that the behaviors that are typically described as codependent are actually normal for someone who is trauma bonded to an abuser. So I think that what you may be talking about, Corrine, is someone who has a trauma bond. And these can be very difficult to understand and to break, because your identity gets wrapped up and subsumed, with your involvement with this person. It may not be willing. That's the thing you said here, someone who willingly wants to be dominated. That's probably not the case. It's probably more of a trauma bond, which is like really hard to get out of. So Gerard says, or asks, why do so many empaths end up with sociopaths? It seems like a perverse mix. Well, empaths are nice people. They look at the best in everybody, and they feel like they can help people, and they want to help people, and it gives them pleasure to help people. And sociopaths look at this and say, bingo, here's somebody that wants to help me. So they get targeted, and then because they want to see the good in everybody, they're sometimes slow to see the bad and don't want to believe it. And then they get into the trauma bond situation, which I just explained. So, yeah, that happens a lot. So if anyone, if you or anyone realizes or understands that you're empathic, then you really need to protect yourself. We actually have quite a few webinars presented by Mandy Friedman, who explains directly to empaths, how to understand what happened to you and how to protect yourself. So I certainly recommend that folks look into that. So, okay, well, thank you all very much. This has been lots of good questions today, so that's terrific. And we'll see you next week, next Tuesday, for the next episode of Lovefraud Live. Thank you, and good night.